The man who cried at my funeral and kissed my coffin was the same man who paid for the ambush that killed me. But he didn't want me dead just because I had uncovered his war crimes. That was the small secret. His true prize was my sister. He wanted her vulnerable and grieving so he could worm his way into our family, marry her, and take control of a $50 million hotel empire. He was the perfect predator with a flawless plan. But there was one thing he never expected, that his victim would know exactly what he was going to do. What he didn't know is that he wasn't the only clever person in the world. And even after I died, I had a revenge prepared that he could never have seen coming. My name was Crystal Richardson, and if you're hearing this story, it means justice has finally prevailed. I died at age 32 in a faraway land, believing I was serving alongside heroes. But I learned too late that one of them was the biggest villain I'd ever met, and that my death was only the beginning of his twisted plan to destroy everything I loved most. The web I'm about to reveal was spun with blood, greed, and betrayal. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, into a family that built an empire from scratch. The Richardsons owned a luxury hotel chain spread across New England, a business valued at over $50 million. My father, Robert Richardson, started with a small bed and breakfast in Cape Cod in the 1980s and turned it into a conglomerate that could rival major hotel brands. Our mansion in Beacon Hill was a reflection of our family's success. 4 stories of Victorian architecture, flawless gardens, and a privileged view of the Charles River. But to me, those gilded walls always felt like a prison. While my younger sister, Victoria, naturally embraced the life of an heiress, attending charity galas, studying business at Harvard, and learning the family trade, I always dreamed of something different. Crystal, are you crazy? We have everything here. Why throw your life away? Victoria would plead every time I talked about enlisting in the military. She was 2 years younger, but our bond was so deep, it sometimes felt like we shared the same thoughts. Victoria was my best friend, my confidant, the person I loved most in the world. Our parents tried everything to change my mind. They offered me an executive role in the company, trips to Europe, even a larger share in the hotel profits. But I had a hunger for purpose that money couldn't satisfy. I wanted to serve my country, to make a difference, to be more than just another rich heiress. At 22, against the will of my entire family, I enlisted in the Army. I remember the day I left home with my military backpack. Victoria cried so much her eyes stayed red for hours. "Promise me you'll come back, Chris. Promise you won't leave me alone in this world," she whispered as she hugged me. "I'll always be here for you, Vicky. Always," I replied, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. Basic training at Fort Benning was brutal, but I discovered strength and resilience I didn't even know I had. My superiors quickly noticed my natural leadership and unwavering dedication. Within a few years, I was promoted to officer and earned the respect of everyone around me. During 10 years of service, I built a solid reputation as a brave and honorable officer. I completed 3 overseas deployments, 2 in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. I saw horrors no human should ever witness, but also acts of heroism that restored my faith in humanity. It was during my second mission in Afghanistan in 2019 that I met Staff Sergeant Blake Webb. At 35, Blake was considered a true war hero. He had multiple decorations, including a Purple Heart and 2 Bronze Stars. His reputation was flawless. Younger soldiers revered him, senior officers respected him, and I initially felt honored to serve under his command. Blake was tall and athletic, with blonde hair starting to gray at the temples and blue eyes that looked too sincere to hide dark secrets. He had a natural charisma that drew people to him. In our first few months working together, he proved to be a patient mentor and inspiring leader. "Richardson, you've got what it takes to go far in this Army. But you've got to learn to trust your team more. Not every hero has to carry the world alone. In downtime, Blake showed a genuine interest in getting to know his soldiers. He'd ask about our families, our dreams, our fears. Naively, I shared a lot about the Richardsons, about the hotel empire, about Victoria and how much I missed her, about the pressure of carrying such a well-known name in Boston. "Your sister must be something special," he'd say whenever I brought up Victoria. "From the way you talk about her, I can tell she must be smart and beautiful. Sounds like the Richardsons raised two gems." At the time, I thought he was just being kind, a superior officer who cared about his team. How wrong I was. The first signs that something was off started appearing in early 2023, during our third deployment together. Small inconsistencies my trained mind began to notice. Pieces of a sinister puzzle. It started with the medical supplies. Our unit was facing a critical shortage of morphine and antibiotics, but whenever we questioned the chain of command, we were given vague answers about logistical issues. Meanwhile, Blake seemed to have unexplained access to meds for special emergencies. "Sergeant Webb, how did you get those antibiotics for Private Martinez?" I asked one afternoon after he saved a young recruit's life with meds we supposedly didn't have. "I've got my contacts, Richardson. 10 years in the field teaches you how to get creative," he replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But my real suspicion began when I noticed Blake having hushed conversations with local civilians. Interacting with the population wasn't unusual, but there was something furtive about these meetings. He always checked if no one was watching before approaching certain individuals. One night, while on security rounds, I caught Blake handing over a box to an Afghan man I recognized, Abdul Nasir, known for having ties to insurgent groups. The exchange was too quick for me to snap a photo, but I clearly saw Blake receiving an envelope in return. "It's not what you think," Blake told me the next day, apparently aware I had witnessed the meeting. "It's sometimes we have to deal with shady people to get intel that saves American lives. It's a gray area you'll learn to navigate once you've got more experience." His explanation sounded plausible at the time, but my instincts told me otherwise. I started keeping a closer eye on his activities, always discreet, always professional, but always alert. The truth began to unravel in terrifying ways. During a reconnaissance operation in July 2023, our unit was ambushed in a location that had been marked as safe by our intel. We lost 3 soldiers that day, bright, young men with families waiting back home. Blake acted like a hero during the attack, risking his life to pull us out of the kill zone. But something didn't add up. How did they know exactly where we'd be? I asked my closest friend in the Army, Sergeant First Class Stephen Martinez, as we processed the loss of our teammates. Stephen was a 29-year-old Puerto Rican veteran, father of 2 small kids, and the most loyal person I've ever known. Unlike Blake, Stephen never tried to impress anyone with grand tales or performative heroics. He simply did his job with quiet competence and treated his soldiers like family. I thought it was strange too, Chris. Our route was changed last minute, and it was Blake who suggested the change, Stephen muttered, checking to make sure no one else was listening. We started investigating in secret. Stephen used his contacts in military intelligence to access intercepted communications, while I began documenting Blake's suspicious behavior. I used my personal camera to photograph his civilian encounters, recorded conversations when possible, and noted inconsistencies in his reports. The most shocking discovery came in September. I managed to follow Blake to a nighttime meeting with Abdul Nasur, this time bringing recording equipment. Hidden behind the rubble of a bombed-out building, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. "The Americans are planning an operation on Friday in the Northern District," Blake said in English, knowing Abdul understood. "Same payment as usual?" $5,000. Half now, half after, Abdul replied, handing over an envelope. "And the medical supplies you asked for arrived yesterday. Morphine, antibiotics, surgical kits. Total price, 15 grand. My world collapsed in that moment. Blake wasn't just corrupt. He was actively sabotaging American operations and selling off supplies meant to save the lives of our soldiers. U.S. troops were dying because of his betrayal, and he was profiting from every death. Over the following months, Stephen and I gathered evidence meticulously. Photos of Blake with known insurgents, recordings of incriminating conversations, documents showing discrepancies in the supply inventories, and, the most damning of all, offshore bank records where Blake was hiding millions of dollars. But Blake was untouchable. He had powerful political connections, protection from corrupt superiors in the chain of command, and any direct accusation against a decorated war hero would be seen as jealousy or slander. We needed a different strategy. "We've got enough evidence to ruin him, but he's too protected here," Stephen said during one of our secret meetings. "We need someone high up in the U.S. military who's completely clean." That's when we devised our plan. Stephen would use his contacts to identify trustworthy federal investigators, while I would compile a complete dossier with all the evidence. But we needed a way to ensure the information reached the right people, even if something happened to us. "If anything happens to me, you have to promise you'll keep going. And if Blake finds out what we're doing and tries to go after my family..." "Nothing's going to happen to you, Chris. We'll take that bastard down, and he'll rot in prison for the rest of his life," Stephen said with conviction. But I had a bad feeling. Blake was smarter and more dangerous than we thought. During our months of investigating, I noticed he had started watching me more closely. His questions about my family became more specific, more invasive. "Your sister Victoria must be finishing up at Harvard now, right? What was her major again?" he asked once over dinner. "How do you remember that?" I replied, immediately on alert. "You talk about her so much it's hard to forget. She must be a special one. I bet she inherited both the beauty and brains of the Richardson family." His comments started sounding less like friendly interest and more like someone collecting intel. A quick search on the unit's shared laptop revealed someone had been extensively researching the Richardson family. Details about our hotel business, residential addresses, and photos of Victoria pulled from social media. "Stephen, he knows about my family. He knows about Victoria, about the company. Everything," I whispered, experiencing a fear unlike anything I'd felt in combat. "Stay calm, Chris. We're almost ready to expose him. Just a few more days and we'll have enough to bury him." But Blake was always one step ahead. In October 2024, during a routine operation that he had personally planned, our unit was ambushed in a way that left no doubt it was a deliberate trap. Blake positioned our team in a completely exposed area, citing intel that never existed. As the gunfire erupted, I saw Blake communicating on the radio using codes I didn't recognize. He wasn't coordinating our defense, he was guiding the attack against us. "Chris, get out of there!" Stephen yelled when he realized I was directly in the line of fire. The last thing I remember was Blake looking straight at me as the grenade exploded. There was no surprise in his eyes, no panic, just cold, calculated satisfaction. The look of someone who had just completed a mission. Shrapnel tore through my chest and abdomen. As life drained from my body, I heard Blake shouting for medical help, playing the role of the desperate officer trying to save his soldier, but his eyes told a different story. He had orchestrated my death because he discovered we were investigating him. I died in that dry and distant land, at 32, believing I'd take my secrets to the grave. But I had underestimated Stephen Martinez's loyalty and my own ability to plan beyond death.
3 months after my military funeral at Arlington, Blake showed up at the Richardson family mansion in Beacon Hill. My parents were still shattered by the loss, but Victoria was completely destroyed. She blamed herself for not convincing me to stay, carrying an emotional weight that was slowly consuming her soul. "Mr. Richardson, I'm Staff Sergeant Blake Webb. I served alongside Cristal for many years," he said with perfectly timed tears in his eyes as my father opened the door. "She talked about you all the time, especially Victoria. I know this is a difficult time, but I'd love to share some stories from her final days if that brings any comfort to the family." Blake was a masterful actor. He arrived at our home wearing his pristine military uniform, carrying a box of personal belongings that I had supposedly left for my family. His posture was humble, his words precise, his grief seemingly genuine. Cristal always said Victoria was the most important person in her life. He lied shamelessly to my sister. In the last few months, she was planning to request a transfer to a base closer to Boston because she missed the family so much. Victoria, starved for any connection to my memory, drank in every word like water in a desert. Blake had studied our family dynamic meticulously through the stories I had naively shared, and he knew exactly which emotional strings to pull. Over the following months, Blake became a constant presence in the Richardson household. He visited regularly, always bringing new memories of me, always offering a shoulder for Victoria to cry on. He manipulated her grief with surgical precision, filling the void my death had left. "Cristal made me promise I'd look after you if anything ever happened to her," he whispered to Victoria during a visit in March 2025. "She said you were strong, but that she worried you carried too much pain alone." A complete lie, of course. I never asked Blake to look after anyone in my family, but Victoria, broken by grief and isolated in her sorrow, found in Blake the emotional anchor she so desperately needed. The seduction was subtle, but relentless. Blake researched everything about the Richardson fortune and discovered Victoria held a $10 million life insurance policy and was heir to half of the hotel empire worth over $50 million. His plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Win Victoria over, marry her, wait a few months to establish legitimacy as her heir, and then stage a domestic accident that would look natural. During their engagement, Blake began asking seemingly innocent questions about Victoria's routine, her anxiety meds, her tendency to take long baths when she was stressed. He was meticulously planning her death. But there was something Blake didn't know. Before I died, I left specific instructions with Stephen Martinez. "Stephen, if anything happens to me, and if Blake Webb tries to get close to my family in any way, you have to open this envelope. Inside, there's everything you need to protect the people I love." I told him 2 weeks before the fatal ambush. Stephen protested, thinking I was being too paranoid, but he promised to follow my instructions exactly as written. The wedding was set for June 15th, 2025, at Trinity Church in Boston, the same place where my parents had married 35 years earlier. The ceremony was to be grand, filled with Boston's elite, the perfect cover for Blake's murderous intentions. But Stephen Martinez had spent the last several months investigating Blake even more aggressively. Using the federal contacts we had identified during our joint investigation, he uncovered information that would have terrified me if I were still alive. Blake had purchased a compound that mimics natural heart attacks, acquired from the same black market he used to sell stolen medical supplies. His internet history showed extensive searches for fatal domestic accidents, undetectable poisons, and how to inherit property quickly after a spouse's death. More horrifying still, Blake wasn't just a corrupt soldier. Investigations revealed he was responsible for the deaths of 3 other soldiers over the years, each of whom had uncovered parts of his schemes. I was merely his latest victim in a decade-long career of calculated murder. Stephen found out that Blake planned to kill Victoria 4 to 6 months after the wedding, enough time to seem like a grieving husband, but not so long as to raise suspicions over financial motive.
On the morning of June 15th, Stephen drove from Washington, D.C. to Boston carrying a folder that would change everything. He arrived at Trinity Church an hour before the ceremony, wearing his full dress uniform and holding the documents that represented my final act of posthumous revenge. The church was packed with over 300 guests, business leaders, politicians, Boston socialites, all gathered to celebrate what they thought was a love story born from tragedy. Victoria looked radiant in her custom wedding dress, glowing with a happiness I hadn't seen on her face since before my death. Blake, flawless in his military uniform, wore the confident smile of a man who believed his plan was working perfectly. In a few hours, he'd officially become a Richardson. In a few months, he'd be the only one left. When the priest asked if anyone had any objections, the silence was broken by a firm and steady voice. "I'm sorry for the interruption, but there's something everyone here needs to know about this man." Stephen Martinez had walked into the church and was making his way to the altar with the determination of a soldier on a sacred mission. All eyes turned toward him as Blake turned pale, finally recognizing the mortal danger approaching. "My name is Sergeant First Class Stephen Martinez. I served alongside Crystal Richardson for 5 years. She asked me to deliver this if something specific happened," he said, pulling a sealed letter from his military folder. "Crystal instructed me to open this letter only if 2 events occurred. First, if anything happened to her. Second, if Blake Webb ever tried to get close to her family. Both of those conditions have been met." The silence in the church was deafening. Victoria looked back and forth between Stephen and Blake, still not fully grasping what was unfolding. Blake, meanwhile, began slowly backing away, eyes scanning the exits. Stephen opened the envelope with military solemnity and began to read. "If you're hearing this, it means Blake Webb killed me or had me killed and is now trying to infiltrate my family. Everything I'm about to reveal was investigated and documented by me and Stephen Martinez over 8 months of meticulous work." The church erupted in murmurs as Stephen continued reading my letter. "Blake Webb is not the hero you think he is. He's a traitor who sold American medical supplies to insurgents, leaked intel about military operations to our enemies, and has murdered at least 4 U.S. soldiers who discovered his crimes, including me." Blake tried to protest. "This is insane! You can't believe—" But Stephen cut him off, pulling photographs from the folder. "These are pictures of Blake selling morphine and antibiotics to Abdul Nasir, a known associate of terrorist groups. These are audio recordings of him revealing American operation coordinates in exchange for cash." Victoria covered her mouth in shock, finally beginning to comprehend the horror unfolding before her. Stephen continued reading my letter. "But what I've discovered about Blake Webb goes beyond military treason. He extensively researched the Richardson family months before my death. He knows about our fortune, about Victoria's life insurance policies, about every detail I naively shared during our conversations. He's not here out of love or to honor my memory. He's here to steal everything that belongs to the Richardson family. And to do that, Victoria must die." Panic rippled through the church. Blake made a dash for the exit, but Stephen had already alerted federal agents who were stationed at every door. "There's more," Stephen shouted over the growing chaos. "Investigations conducted after Crystal's death revealed that Blake Webb purchased substances that simulate natural heart attacks. His internet history includes searches on how to kill a wife without raising suspicion." Victoria fainted in the arms of our cousin Sarah. My father, realizing he had nearly handed his surviving daughter to a serial killer, lunged at Blake in fury. But the federal agents were faster. Blake was arrested right at the altar, handcuffed in front of the entire Boston elite who had gathered to witness what was supposed to be his final triumph. As they dragged him out, Stephen read the last lines of my letter. "Victoria, my love, I know my death destroyed you, but I hope knowing I managed to protect you even after I was gone brings you some comfort. Blake Webb chose the wrong family to manipulate. The Richardsons are strong, and you are stronger than you know. Live your life, be happy, build something beautiful from the ashes of this tragedy. And always remember, even in death, I'm still watching over you."
The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Blake Webb's crimes. Beyond military treason and the murders of American soldiers, it was discovered he had a pattern of targeting grieving families of fallen service members. Victoria was not his first intended victim, only the most profitable. Blake was convicted of treason, multiple counts of murder, fraud, and attempted premeditated homicide. He received the death sentence and currently awaits execution in a maximum security federal prison. Throughout the trial, he remained arrogant, showing no remorse for the soldiers he murdered or the families he devastated. Victoria underwent months of intensive therapy to process the trauma of nearly marrying her sister's killer. But her resilient spirit, the same one I always admired, eventually prevailed. She channeled her pain into purpose, using part of the family's fortune to create the Crystal Richardson Foundation. The foundation fights military corruption, provides legal support to families of soldiers who died under suspicious circumstances, and funds investigations into treason within the armed forces. In just 2 years, the organization helped expose 3 other major cases of military corruption and saved countless lives. Stephen Martinez became the foundation's director of security, dedicating his post-military life to honoring the memory of the soldiers we lost. He remains the same loyal and honorable man he's always been, now protecting other families the way he protected mine. My parents, initially devastated by nearly handing Victoria over to a murderer, found renewed purpose in supporting the foundation's mission. Our hotel chain began offering free lodging to veteran families and financial backing to organizations fighting military corruption. Victoria never married, not out of fear or trauma, but because she discovered her purpose was bigger than any romantic relationship. She became a tireless advocate for military families, even testifying before Congress about the urgent need for reform in military oversight. Most importantly, she's alive, strong, and making a difference in the world. My posthumous revenge didn't just bring justice for Blake's crimes, it transformed a tragedy into a force for good. Sometimes when Victoria is working late in her office at the foundation, she still talks to me like I'm there. "We did it, Chris. We turned your death into something that saves lives." And she's right. Even in death, I fulfilled the promise that mattered most, to always be there to protect my sister. Blake Webb thought killing me would end my investigation and clear the path for his murderous ambitions. Instead, my death was only the beginning of his downfall. Justice may take time, but it always arrives. And for those who think they can hide behind uniforms and medals to commit atrocities, remember the story of Crystal Richardson. Some promises are kept beyond the grave, and some heroes keep protecting even when they're no longer here to fight. My revenge was perfect, not because it destroyed a wicked man, but because it saved a precious life and created a legacy that will keep protecting others for generations to come. Blake Webb may have stolen my future, but I made sure he'd never destroy the future of the person I loved most. And in the end, that's all that truly matters.